everyone! This is the second part of my video showing me making my roof tiles for my doll's house. And this video starts with a little trip to my garage, past all of my nice plants that are appearing in my garden, to have a look at some slate roof tiles. So if you've watched my previous video, you will know that I've already made some roof tiles, but I can't decide whether to keep them terracotta or whether to paint them a slate colour. And these tiles are going to go onto my doll's house, which is a converted warehouse with an art gallery at the bottom and an apartment at the top. So I thought I would have a look at the slate tiles in my garage. I have a slate roof on my real house, so that's why I have some slate tiles in my garage, some spare ones, and I thought it might be helpful to have a little look at the textures and the colours. And of course, because I'm finding it difficult to choose between slate or terracotta or a different type of tile, I decided to have a look at different roofs to try and help me make my decision. I particularly like this roof because it's covered in moss and I like the mottled effect, and I am wondering whether I can add this sort of effect when I'm painting my tiles, if I paint them. Of course, if I keep them terracotta, they need to look more like this. I visited this wonderful little pottery and garden centre. There's some information here if you want to pause it to have a little read. But I knew that they make tiles and they make pots and all things that are made out of clay. And I thought maybe if I went to have a little look, it might also help me to make my decision. They don't use the tiles just on the roofs here, they also use them for the walls. Really clever, and they look amazing. Again, I was looking carefully at the textures, so the moss, the way that the tiles were coloured. I found this part interesting, this is in the garden centre, because if you look at all of the tiles, they're sectioned into different colours. Of course, whilst I was at the garden centre, I couldn't resist but buy a couple of plants, so I do now have some bulbs to plant in my own garden. We went for a little walk around the local area. It's really lovely because it's spring and everything's just starting to flower. We also went for a drink and some food at a little art gallery and cafe, and look at the woodwork and the tiles and the brick. I felt like it looks just like the same colour of green that I've used on my doll's house, and it's a pure coincidence. And inside the cafe, look at the inside of the roof. It is making me want to now remove the ceiling of my doll's house so that I can put this style of roof up at the top of the apartment. What do you think? And I have to tell you that the food was amazing. That was spinach and ricotta cannelloni, and it was the best spinach and ricotta cannelloni I've ever had. So after doing my research and having some lunch, it was time to go home because I did need to make a decision. If you look down on the left there, that is the garden centre. You can see all of the terracotta tiles on top. It was a really beautiful day. Back at home, I took the tiles that I'd made in my last video and I decided to make a little sample of terracotta tiles and slate tiles to try and help me make my decision. Just like I always do when I'm painting, I used my little book called The Colour Mixing Companion by Julie Collins because it's always really helpful to choose the right colours. With slate tiles, I didn't want them to be too blue. I didn't want a cold colour, I wanted quite a warm colour. So I had a little look through for the greys and wondered if I could have a grey that was more on the warm side. Eventually I landed on this one, which is made out of burnt sienna and cobalt blue with some white. So I had a little look in my paint box to see if I had burnt sienna and cobalt blue in acrylic paint. I knew that I did in oil paint, but obviously if I painted these tiles with oil paint, they would take weeks to dry. So I found some acrylic. And it was time to start painting. Do you like my little water pot? So I was bought these two pots and I absolutely love them. They've been sat on a shelf for ages and I have just had them sat there, and I thought, actually, you know what, I paint most days, so why don't I use them for this purpose? I'd been reluctant to use them for painting because I didn't want to get paint on them, but actually I think they're so beautiful that I should be using them every day. So I took a kebab skewer and I put some double-sided tape on it. Because what I'm going to do is stick down my tiles to this, because that means that I won't have to hold them whilst I'm painting them. It means that I can hold the skewer instead of each individual little tile. I noticed that some of the tiles had a little bit of a rough edge, so with a nail file I just sanded them down before painting them. I've just remembered that I've forgotten to count the tiles, and I said in the last video that I would count them and let you know. I will go and count them in a minute and then I'll come back. So I mixed the burnt sienna and the cobalt blue. I wasn't sure how this was going to turn out. The colour mixing book has always been really reliable, so I did trust that it would make the colour that I wanted it to. But I always think that cobalt blue is so bright. I've actually recently bought some really nice new paintbrushes. I think I'm going to use them maybe for watercolour painting soon. By the way, thanks to anyone who has watched my last video that I posted midweek of my painting of a bee. I'm never sure whether to post my videos about painting because obviously primarily this channel is about my doll's houses, so I'm really grateful to anyone that's watched that video. Thank you so much. So I decided to add a little bit more burnt sienna because the colour looked quite blue. And this is how the colour looked. I decided to paint one tile slightly darker and then to add a little bit of white for each tile so that I could compare the colours. Of course, it was really important to paint the edges as well because these would be visible when they're stuck down onto the doll's house roof. It was harder to paint the tiles that had more sand in them, just because of the texture. Now of course, I don't feel like slate tiles really have as much texture. I think the sand is a good thing to use if you are sticking with terracotta tiles, but I think maybe if I was to do a whole roof again of slate tiles, I maybe wouldn't put so much sand in. Maybe a tiny bit, because I do like a little bit of texture, but the ones with loads of sand on, I think are more appropriate for the terracotta tiles. So my little cat was watching all the time. Next it was time to start working on the terracotta tiles. Obviously they're already quite terracotta in colour, but I just wanted to make them look a little bit darker. So I used the same technique of sticking them down to a kebab skewer. I bought these kebab skewers years ago. I think I had about 100 in the tub, and I use them for so many things. I use them when I'm mixing my paint. I use them when I'm applying glue to delicate little fine areas. They've been really useful. So to add some colour to these tiles, I decided to use some soft pastels. Now, in a second you'll see that I use a craft knife to scrape away at the pastels to make it powdery. Obviously, I'm going to be using a craft knife for this, which is sharp. So as I always say in my videos, please don't copy my techniques. I don't want you to hurt yourselves. I'm not an expert, so this is just a diary entry. So I scraped some of the soft pastel away into a little jar. And I used some black chalk pastel, or soft pastel, and I used some brown as well. The brown was very much a similar colour to the terracotta, so I wasn't sure whether it would make much difference, but I thought I would try anyway. Popped my lid back on my knife, and then I just used a paintbrush to apply some of this chalk pastel. In areas where the black pastel looked quite dark, this is where I added some brown back in. The colour looked different depending on how textured each tile was, but I quite liked the variation here. I then decided on the last few tiles to try out some different colours just to see what the effect would be. So I added some green. I added this bluey colour, it's almost like a purpley blue. And I added this yellow colour. So I didn't really like the blue colour, but I did like the yellow. And the green was interesting too. I'd quite like to get a soft pastel that's a green that's not quite as bright as the one that I own. So this was the blue and it just didn't look right. I did a bit of black and a little bit of brown just to see what it would look like together, but definitely the yellow and the green were interesting mixes to add to the tiles. So I had to leave my slate tiles to dry and I moved them out of the way. As soon as I turned round, my cat had sat in the spot where I was painting. And I left them to dry for a little while before coming back and holding them up against my roof to try and help me make a decision. I laid the tiles out next to each other just to make it a little bit easier to compare. So this was the slate ones. They were still a tiny little bit wet, so they were holding themselves in this position whilst I had a look. And this was the terracotta ones. When I laid these ones out on the doll's house roof, because obviously they're not wet, they wouldn't really overlap without any glue, so. I really liked both of them. There was a point where I thought, can I just do half of the roof with slate and half of the roof with terracotta? So to help me to make my decision, I decided to post on YouTube and on Instagram as well. And this was the results. So on Instagram it was quite an even split between votes, but on YouTube, slate definitely won. So I was actually edging towards using the slate anyway, just because I felt like it was more in keeping with the building. So I decided to go with slate. Please don't copy this. This was a really silly idea. I masking taped some greaseproof paper to my table, and I was using the greaseproof paper just to protect the table from the paint because this was leftover greaseproof paper from when I'd been making the tiles, so I thought it was better than using some new paper to cover my table. But of course I stuck the masking tape to the table, and when I peeled it off it took a little bit of the tabletop away with it. As you may have noticed, my tabletop is already really damaged, so I am looking for some new ways to cover this tabletop anyway, to repair it. So if you've got any advice on how to repair a tabletop like this, please do let me know. I think I might just have to cover it with something completely different. So I used some double-sided tape again to stick the tiles down so that they wouldn't move around whilst I was painting them. Again, for any edges where I thought they were a little bit sharp or rough, I just sanded them down. Well, I used a little nail file, not sandpaper, but sandpaper would have worked. So this took me a long time. Whilst you're watching me put these down, I'm going to go and quickly count the tiles on my doll's house, because I did say that I would let you know. 1 second. Okay, I'm back. So, I'm going to tell you at the end how many tiles there were. Because I need to explain, they're not all on the roof right now. So yeah, I'll wait until the end to tell you. Please don't skip ahead to the end. Watch the full video. Oh, you can skip ahead if you want. So, it took ages to stick all of these tiles down. But as you can probably tell, it was quite a nice, relaxing job to do when you have a lovely cat sat on your knee and the sunlight's coming in through the window. So when they were all stuck down, it was time to start painting them. I'd been out and bought some more paint because the little tubes of burnt sienna and cobalt blue wouldn't have been enough. I actually bought this paint with the cobalt blue because there wasn't any in the same type as the burnt sienna. It says that it's really highly pigmented, so I was a little bit concerned, and actually when I've mixed the colours it wasn't quite the same as the tiles that I'd painted before. I prefer the tiles that I'd painted first time round. This colour came out quite a bit more purpley in colour, and I do think that's just because the cobalt blue was a different make and it was a different sort of level of pigment. So when I painted my first tile, I decided that it looked a little bit too blue, So I did a bit more of the burnt sienna, but this is what then really turned it into sort of a maroony purple colour. I wasn't too concerned about this because, as I said earlier, I wanted a warmer colour of tile. It just maybe wasn't quite true to how real slates would look. But I quite like it. So as I said earlier, it was harder to paint tiles that had the sand on them. And you'll notice as I'm painting these that they're all slightly different colours. So I was actually colour mixing as I went on purpose so that I ended up with some different colours of tiles because I didn't want them to all look exactly the same. You might also notice there I'm using another kebab skewer just to hold the tiles in place whilst I was painting because some of them were just moving a little bit on the tape that I'd stuck them onto. Whilst they were drying, I went and did some other tasks. So I'd just done a new card design for my Etsy shop, which is this one. So I decided to print it off and upload it to my shop. I'll pop the link in my description if you want to have a look at my Etsy shop. And when the tiles were all dry, it was time to start removing them, ready to attach them to the doll's house. When I removed the first one, I realised that actually I'd missed some of the edges, even though I'd tried really hard to make sure that they were all completely covered in paint. I think removing them from this tape took just as long as it did to stick them down, and I did break a few as I went, but I still kept the broken pieces because I knew that when I attached them to the doll's house, there would be some areas where I would need some different sizes and shapes of tile. All in all, the painting of these tiles took around a day. So that's the sticking them down, the painting them, the removing them, and the attaching them to the doll's house roof. So I used a glue gun to attach them. Obviously it's hot glue, so I was being careful, and I'd put a board down on my carpet so that any glue would drip onto there rather than onto my carpet. Now, as you can see, those two tiles look really different in colour, so I did swap them, and as I was sticking them down, I was sorting them into little piles of what sort of colour they were and also their texture. Some of the ones that have the sand on them were far too rough, so I have actually separated them and they've not gone onto the doll's house roof. There were some areas where I needed slightly smaller tiles, and I found that I could actually gently trim them with scissors. Now, the thinner part of the tile would split, so I could only trim it if I was keeping one part really thick. If I needed a really thin part, I couldn't really do it with the scissors. But it also meant that one edge would look like terracotta again, so I probably will have to go back with some more paint at some point. Now, watching this back, I do wish that I'd stuck the tiles a little bit lower down when they overlapped, but I did it like this because I was trying to save tiles. I didn't want to run out of them. But as it happens, I did run out of them, so I only managed to cover the front of the house and the whole back still needs doing, so I've got loads more tiles to make. So I said earlier that I would tell you how many tiles I used altogether. So on the front here and on the little windows at the front, I've used 372 tiles. I have 112 left, which wouldn't have been enough to do the back. So altogether, that is 484 tiles. So I think that the closest guess in last week's video was 300 tiles. So well done to the person that guessed 300. If someone else was closer and I've missed it, I'm really sorry. A lot of people submitted guesses, but I think 300 was the closest. So this roof isn't finished yet. I'm not too happy with the fact that there's such a big variation in colours on the tiles, but I am going to go over them with some soft pastels to add some more colour and texture. So I will show you that in next week's video. I also want to add some moss and some other little embellishments too. So, thank you so much for watching. Please do let me know what you think. Obviously I also need to do the back of the doll's house, which means making a whole new batch of tiles, but I probably won't film that bit, I'll just do that bit. But in next week's video I'll show you the embellishments. If you've got any ideas of anything to add to the roof, please do let me know. And if you're not already subscribed, please do click subscribe and leave a comment. I always love to read them all. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in next week's video.